So it's my absolute pleasure, and I'm so delighted. Please welcome the segment producers, Sarah Connell.
Hello.
Hi, Sarah. Hi. And head writer, Becky Drysdale.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thank you for joining us this afternoon. So first of all, I'm so excited to talk to you because you were one of the first shows that really pivoted during coronavirus. So talk about the conversations that you had and the plan that you then put into action for this. Sarah, should we start with you, Sarah?
Sure, yeah. So it all kind of came together pretty quickly. Our last day in the studio was March 12th or 13th, I forget exactly, but we did that show without an audience. And I think the audience was canceled that day, and that felt like it was starting to get real. I think it was also the day that the NBA shut down and Tom Hanks announced he tested positive. So it all kind of felt like this is real. We're all going home. But we kind of thought we were going home for 2 weeks. We had a hiatus, in there anyway. So we're like, all right, see you in 2 weeks, everybody. And then we realized very quickly after that we weren't coming back for a while. And so it was Jimmy's idea to just start. His whole thing has been, it's important to him our show serves as a bright light at the end of the day, right? It's tough times, and we know that. But when we're watching and consuming that news all day, he wants to provide an outlet at the end of the day to turn your brain off for a second and maybe laugh, re-energize for the next day. So he felt the need to want to do that pretty quickly, and got on the phone with the producers to figure out how. And we did he did the Wash Your Hands song on Instagram, and then he did the St. Patty's Day song, and then we had Lin-Manuel Miranda do an interview. And then once we did those couple things, we realized we could, do a full show, and it came together pretty quickly after that. We were doing full shows.
Yeah, and that day that Sarah is referring to, whatever it was, March 12th, I think, was my final interview to get this job. So while I was in that meeting, there was sort of a buzz going around about are we going to do shows next week without an audience? People kind of, it was like Sarah said, this moment of okay, this is happening in a real way and not just a thing that I've heard about, and now everyone has to go home. And that was my first meeting with Jimmy and my last time in the studio. So I've actually not done this show in the studio. I've only done this job over Zoom.
Oh my gosh. Well, congratulations on
Thank you.
Being your head writer. But talk about what it is like to start, in this position remotely, not being in the writer's room, but you're doing such a fantastic job anyway, but just talk about
Thank you.
Adjusting to this.
Every job, every writing job is so different anyway. And I think that going from the kind of productions and shows that I'm used to a job like this would have been such an extreme change for me anyway, that I don't think the Zoom factor specifically added any kind of craziness to that adjustment. First of all, I don't know what the difference is in terms of doing it in the studio, but I come from a sketch background and a half-hour TV background, so adjusting to a daily show, a nightly show would have been so massive anyway. And this is, it's totally normal for me to do it over Zoom. And people talk about the studio and this three-dimensional universe that they're used to doing the show in, and I'm like, well, I'm going to have to just totally have to relearn how to do that when we go back to the studio. I think, to sort of dovetail off what Sarah was saying, I had sort of been in meetings about doing this job, and then the quarantine happened, and I saw what Jimmy was doing at home, and that actually was a big reason I wanted to be a part of it, was because I thought he, first of all, did it immediately, and second of all, it felt even more necessary for people to have some continuity and sort of a friendly face at the end of the day, and that was actually a big draw for me. what he was doing with the home shows, and letting us into his personal world a little bit, and it felt really there's comfort in it. So I was really excited to be a part of that part of it too.
Yeah. And you've put together some amazing segments over this time. One of my personal favorites is when you had Lady Gaga on there just before she was making her announcements. So talk about the process of that all coming together, and and Jimmy, and like writing that whole sequence between the two of you.
Yeah, Becky, do you want to talk about it?
I think that was like, God, we're talking about when Gaga was on and had to like get off the phone.
Yeah.
That was like my first week. So it was literally like me trying to be like set up my email and like figure out who everyone was, and like the show is a much larger machine than I have ever worked. I'm used to these like little rooms with 5 writers and 1 producer, and everyone shares a legal pad and we all hug at the end of the day. This is like hundreds and hundreds of people. So it was kind of a blur, and what's amazing is what that thing was that she couldn't talk about ended up being such a massive, amazing thing, which was really one of the first things, the Global Citizen thing was one of the first things I was really a part of on the show, even though it was sort of, Jimmy had his part of it, and then it was this massive thing that was happening outside of that. But that felt also like it just felt nice to be a part of that and watching it, and some, also I'm a giant Lady Gaga fan, but just like something that was so hopeful and positive, and during this very hopeless and negative time. So that was a really, really awesome sort of entry point for me to be like, oh, this is, I get to be a very small part of this really lovely thing. But I do, in my memory, it was like, wait, Lady Gaga has to come back on Friday, and what are we going to do on this day, because Lady Gaga had to move her appearance. But it was all sort of, it's like trying to, hop on a train that is moving at full speed without breaking your legs. So I was, I was like so new and just trying to like catch up, and, but it was exciting, Sarah probably has more behind the scenes info on that than I do.
That's kind of how, I feel that way, and I've been at the show longer than you have, but that was one of the things where it's like Lady Gaga is also, so involved creatively too. So and Jimmy is so open to when someone has an idea and a good idea, and we'll roll with it and, elevate it. And so that was just kind of like 2 people who know each other pretty decently at this point from her appearances on the show, and that moment working and paying off. But it's also, we're not in, that could have been probably easier to do in studio because we could all be there and coordinate it and the timing and whatever it was. But that now we're doing it all at our own homes. And Jimmy's filming it all too. Like there's no camera in there saying, okay, and action. Lady Gaga's calling herself and calling Jimmy. Like that wouldn't happen in studio necessarily.
Yeah.
So you have those elements too. It's so DIY. So it's just part of the fun of it.
What is a typical day like for you now, especially working from home and putting the show together remotely? Because previously you would go into the studio and, you'd go through it all, but given the circumstances, take us through.
Yeah, I can a little bit about so it's a little bit different. Some of it's the same. Somehow the day starts earlier at home. Especially
I'm in LA. I don't even want to hear about it.
Well, I have a little kid.
I'm not a morning person, believe it or not. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's true. That's true.
But anyway, and so we're taping interviews a little earlier than we would normally in studios. So deadlines are earlier. We like to get Jimmy notes, in the morning. So my mornings are spent kind of going through the segment notes for the day, reading through those, getting those all in order to send out to Jimmy. We have a 10:30 a.m. Zoom production meeting with like 150 people on it. And then from there's side Zoom meetings and department meetings. And, you know, if I have a guest, I'm reading through research on that guest, doing the pre-interview for that guest, writing up segment notes. And then if I have a guest on that day's show, then I'm looking at the footage after the interview is taped and kind of going through the post-production process on it to make sure it's all perfect for air.
My day is completely different.
Take it away.
What time does your day start, Becky?
My day starts at about 6:30, which, believe it or not, is not my natural cycle of sleep. But I am sort of back-to-back Zooms from about 7 a.m. until 1. And they're sort of very early in the meeting. Right now, at least, while the news cycle is like changing hourly, very early in the morning, we look at a bunch of ideas that come in from the writers in the morning, choose sort of what we want to work on for that day. And those things need to be actually created or written by the time we have our creative meeting, which is at noon Eastern. So some of that stuff has to be turned around in an hour. You know, either a sketch needs to go from an idea to an actual script, or an idea to a fully produced video in an hour or so. And our editors and our graphics people are phenomenal, and they make magical things happen in 0 time. And then we have our creative meeting where we sort of put things in front of Jimmy, which is a mix of things we're going to do that day, things we're going to do tomorrow. If we have a guest coming on and we're going to do, you know, a sketch with them or a game with them, we'll talk about that and how that's all going to work. And then it's about turning things around to actually be shot, while at the same time the monologue gets put together, and then we have a meeting about that. So it's really fast, and it's really it's you know, I'm only on the Zoom meetings that I'm on, so everything else is going on behind the scenes in a pretty miraculous, amazing way. And when the news is as, you know, turbulent and fast changing as it is right now, there's very little time to figure out sort of like, how are we going to approach this? Like, there's no time for like, let's have a 6-hour conversation about how we're going to handle this, because there has to be a show on that night. So it's pretty amazing, you know, how everyone kind of works together to, between the guests and the content and the comedy and Jimmy and the games and the monologue, all of those pieces kind of come together for there to be a show on every night. It's, you know, I'm doing it, but I'm still fairly new to it. So I'm also kind of like impressed, and there are days where you're just kind of amazed that it happened. Because there's a lot of kind of things that are out of our control, like the news, like, you know, when a talent has a conflict, or so-and-so, you know, so-and-so actor that is going to be in a sketch can't get their computer to work right, or, you know, things that are always sort of, you know, wrenches in the works that we can't anticipate and stuff like that. So it is pretty amazing with the size of the machine that it runs as smoothly as it does, and that there's a show on the air every night.
Yeah. Do you have a highlight from collaborating with a guest during this time of writing a skit and then having it all come together?
I mean, I think you know, since I've been around, we've done a handful of the Longest Days of Our Lives sketches, which I think are the most, it's nice because it's the same guests, you know, but now we have, you know, different cameos and stuff, but, you know, I think that's been the most, that involves the most sort of moving pieces, you know, and it also, I think, is a really great example of like leaning into our limitations in terms of like what we can do remotely. And then, of course, you know, you give Will and Kristen anything, and it's going to be brilliant, not to minimize the Rachel, who's our brilliant writer who writes them. But it's been really fun to have kind of like a piece that we can recur and kind of change and bring other guests into. And that's been really fun to watch. You know, in the last month or so, we've done less just sort of like wacky comedy with our guests because it hasn't felt appropriate, not only for us to do it, but for us to ask our guests to do it. So part of it in the last little while has been finding this balance between, you know, what is tasteful and appropriate and when it's time to sort of have that respite and bring back the comedy and stuff like that.
Yeah. And, you know, talking about going back to the music segment, one that was so amazing, I saw being shared everywhere, was having the Hamilton cast or Philippa Sue sing Helpless, and that production. Like, talk about what went into that, and because you're also dealing with music and, you know, that aspect too. So how long did that take to get everybody together and then, you know, present it as a segment?
Becky, do you want to talk about
Sure,
that?
sure. Yeah. We have one of the guys who works on our show, John McDonald, who does these sort of musical pieces that we, you know, call Brady Boxes. And he's incredible and amazing, and he's done enough of them now that he's figured out how to do it. And I also know that, you know, the Hamilton cast has done a number of similar things, so I know they already knew what they were doing. And Jimmy and Lin-Manuel are friends and really like to play together and like to work together. So, you know, I am not in any way involved in the nuts and bolts of putting those things together, but it's another kind of, you know, that is definitely the wizardry of John McDonald, and that one in particular was a real, you know, even heightening even what he usually does. Yeah, that was awesome to have on the show, and awesome that sort of it ended up being a Lin-Manuel Miranda Jimmy sort of, you know, another sort of marriage there. But that, you know, it's a real tech lift. It's, you know, they all have to be recorded separately because you can't do it over Zoom because there's lag, and so everyone has to be recorded separately, and then that has to be matched, and it's a real, you know, project, and John does them all the time. We've done a ton of them on the show, you know, and then there's the logistical nightmare that I don't have to be a part of, thank God, which is this, you know, scheduling everyone to record and making sure everyone's phone is turned the right way and making sure the audio comes through and collecting all of that footage and editing it together. You know, to me, I have the, excuse me, luxury of opening an email that says it's done.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another highlight to our department too, just scheduling and then pulling that off for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
I love it. Let's just go all the way back. Like, what's your earliest memory of watching late night TV or like even the Tonight Show? Sarah, let's start with you.
I always loved late night. I loved Saturday Night Live. I loved David Letterman. I was partial to David Letterman, loved The Tonight Show, but, so I would watch them a lot, and then I got to intern at David Letterman, but I always wanted to work in 30 Rock. That was like, I do remember my mom always tells a story. When I was 14, we came to visit New York City. I'm from Rhode Island. We had never been. We parked our like minivan somewhere. My parents were so nervous, and I just got out of the minivan and like darted. I just knew where 30 Rock was, and my mom was like chasing me, like, wait up. And I was like, nope, gotta be there, gotta go. And I really wanted a tour of the, you know, NBC studios, but it was New Year's Day. I don't know. We didn't plan well, but I'd always wanted to work in that building. And so, yeah, I just remember staying up late and recording late night TV off of like my camcorder and then watching it back that way because our VCR didn't work. So that's how I did that.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly grew up watching Saturday Night Live, and I've always been just more of a throw. My brother is 10 years older than me. My sister's 8 years older than me. My parents love comedy. My brother works in comedy. So I also was very lucky to be exposed to a lot of earlier things. So I watched, when I was growing up, not even necessarily Saturday Night Live that was on when I was that age, but I watched the Gilda Radner stuff and the Bill Murray stuff and when Steve Martin was on a lot, and that was sort of, even though it wasn't my generation. And then my brother worked on The Daily Show, and then Colbert, and then Sam B. So he's always been the late night guy. So it's definitely a big turn for me to be in the late night world, because I've been more on sort of the cable sketch world. But I think because Jimmy is, a sketch performer, and because there's more comedy on the show than other late night shows, it felt like a better, fit than some of the other late night shows would have been. I have always dreamed of working on Zoom with people who have worked at 30 Rock. Now I'm hoping to get to do the show at 30 Rock at some point. I would really love that experience,
You're going to love it.
Be a part of that world would be really great, for sure.
Someday soon, hopefully.
Yeah. Becky.
What?
I can't wait to meet you.
Well, I'm only this part of my body. There's nothing from here down. This is just what I look like. No, I mean, I'm working with all of these people. I've probably met 150 people, and I've never seen any of their legs. And I only met Jimmy once before this happened. I know a handful of the writers from like other, projects and other work and stuff, but I haven't met anyone. So it's interesting.
How is Jimmy keeping everybody like together and you two have incredible chemistry. You watch the show, Jimmy's doing such a great job, but like, how are you all staying motivated, and what's he doing like behind the scenes?
I kind of think he just sets the bar from the beginning, just being motivated to even start doing these shows. We were like, okay, all right, we're doing this. Let's do it. His work ethic is, I think some people might have a misconception that he shows up at, we used to tape at 5. So like people probably think like he probably comes in at 4 and then tapes the show. No, he is, and Becky can tell you, like is in every meeting, signs off on everything, involved with all the comedy, involved in the segments and preparing. There's not one part of the show he's not involved in it, and he takes it seriously that way. So it all sets, the bar for us to work so hard. And
yeah, he works his butt off, and he's been, not only signing off and reading, all this stuff, but he's shooting it all, and he's loading the stuff into his teleprompter, and he's putting on the wigs, and his Nancy, his wife, has also been, I don't want to, we don't want to take credit away from Nancy, has been also shooting and helping out, and has been kind of a one-woman crew. But Jimmy's I've just been kind of blown away by how hard he works, and I guess that just filters through. And I think there was one day we did a show where at the end of the day it was like, God, that felt like a NASA launch. Like there was people high-fiving, virtual high-fiving at the end of the day. I think there's a lot of adrenaline involved in just getting it to happen every day, and I think he, like you said, Sarah, just like being the first one and just immediately going home and being like, okay, what does the home show look like, kind of created this energy of like, okay, this is what we're doing. It's hard to even get him to like take a day off. You have a hiatus, and he'll be like, great, what are we going to do over the hiatus? So I think it's something that he also really takes seriously this, what Sarah was saying before too, of just like, we have a job to do while this is going on. So he's really committed.
Yeah. And then, just seeing the clips on YouTube and seeing how many views it's getting, like you can see the show is really reaching people, if they're not watching it when it airs, they're tuning in like days. What is the appeal? Like, what do you think he does? He gets you all get so right that people look at the clips, they come back.
I mean, I think personally, just with speaking interview-wise, Jimmy has always been such a relatable host. Guests like coming on the show because they feel like they're talking to a friend, to an equal, and I think that's translated so well at home, to where the interviews sometimes, to me, feel like you're kind of like eavesdropping on, like accidentally hit a Zoom link, and you're like, oh my God, like I'm in this, because it's just two people hanging out at home. And he's able to take advantage of like the spontaneity that can happen with people in their own homes, like Lin-Manuel just turning to his piano and like firing off a little Dear Theodosia out of nowhere, like, you know, because he's in his home and he can. But Jimmy brings that out of people, and I think, people really connect to that. They relate to it.
Yeah, I think the thing that translates really well from the show, the way it was in the studio and the at-home show, is just this feeling of hanging out with a buddy, and having fun, and there are things that you'll get from John Oliver, Colbert, whatever, that you won't get with Jimmy, but there's a lot that you'll get with Jimmy that you won't get with those guys. And I think that that's a space that he occupies that is unique to him, and I think people really respond to that and feel comforted and invited in, and it's I think it's a unique thing.
Yeah. And let's talk about, like, is there a recent guest who stuck out that made that appearance so special for you? Like, what are your favorites? Sarah?
There's a few. There's a few for different reasons. This moment was just like one of those things, like you couldn't even script it. He was interviewing Russell Wilson and Sierra, and Winnie, his oldest, lost her tooth. And it, like, try telling a 6-year-old who lost their tooth, like, wait, daddy's doing an interview. Like, you can't hold that excitement back. And so she barged into the interview and was like, Dad, like holding the tooth in a Ziploc bag. And it was just such a sweet, spontaneous moment that everyone got involved in. She's telling, Sarah and Russell the story, and they're asking questions, and Jimmy's like beaming with pride. It was like really just a sweet, spontaneous at-home moment that was so relatable, because we're all going through it. We all have versions of that. It was just such a fun thing that got captured on camera. There's been ones that have been interesting just because of technology failings, stuff we all kind of deal with, like Taraji P. Henson's Wi-Fi, not that great, it turns out. Charming for days. We could have said, you know what, we'll do this another time, but Jimmy just like worked with it, and she worked with it, and they laughed about it, and there's some editing work we needed to do, but it became a really funny moment. And it happened with David Chang too. His interview started frozen. Jimmy signed on to the Zoom link, and it was just him in a frozen state. And he said to Jimmy, you know what, let me call you back in 10 minutes. There's good Wi-Fi at the liquor store down the street. I'll go there. I don't know why he knew that.
Yeah.
But he knew that. And Jimmy was like, okay, well, let's just keep the interview going. Well, I'll drive with you. And so David handed his phone to his wife, and his wife sitting in the passenger seat filming David driving, and Jimmy just kept the interview going. They never made it to the liquor store. They did the whole thing from the car, but it was just fun to take advantage of that failing and turn it into a fun moment. So those stick out. And one of my personal favorites was Ben Stiller coming on. And this, I think, was, he had just lost his dad a week prior to the booking. So he could have totally canceled. We absolutely would have understood that. But he said, no, I want to come on and talk about my dad and tell stories. And Jimmy's such a fan of Jerry Stiller. So he was so happy to do that. And it was one of those things that I think in this space, that interview got the chance to just they got to like almost do a podcast on TV, like just kind of hang out, tell stories, have some laughs, have some tender moments. So that was definitely a highlight. I could keep going, but.
Yeah, I think that, like, with both, Corona and everything that's been going on in the news for the last month regarding, race and things that are not funny things, it's, kind of opened up this door to, it's really widened the scope of like what all of our guests are talking about. And so you have, guests that ordinarily would be goofing around, joking around, that we would play a game with or do a sketch with, and to just hear those people have, an honest conversation about what's going on in the world is also, I think, really refreshing, but rare to see that side of a lot of these people, including Jimmy. I think we've tried also, and I think the segment and talent department have been awesome in creating a space to, you know, showcase new talent. We had Sarah Cooper on, and, you know, Astronomy Club. And that's been really exciting to be a part of, because it's also raising, you know, giving people who wouldn't otherwise have that kind of platform a chance to be seen, which has been really cool as well.
Yeah, amazing. And I love that segment. But let's talk about the last question. Like, what's the greatest piece of advice you've both received, especially as, you know, female head writer, female segment producer? Like, talk about that.
Even in terms of being a female head writer, or just, oh man.
Or just in general.
It's kind of boring, but
I know. Well, I'm trying to think, but you go ahead, Sarah.
Well, it's just, I mean, it's just classic good advice, just to keep your head down and work, you know, be nice to people, but just keep moving forward. My husband also, you know, gives me a couple of sports analogies here and there, which I don't, you know, I'm not athletic, but I get what he's trying to say, which is like, you know, tomorrow's a new game, another chance to get on the field, and then another chance to play again. Because you can sometimes get caught up in the moment. If something didn't quite go right, we have a chance at another show the next day.
Yeah. You know, one thing I found at the show, you know, even in talking about how massive the machine is, and, you know, how many moving parts there are, you know, I felt really, really embraced and welcomed very, very fast. And I felt very safe in, you know, expressing my opinion, very safe to say, I don't like this, or we need to do that. I feel like the general vibe of the show, and the the producers of the show really made a space for me very, very fast. And when I signed on and when I started, you know, they really created this, like, no pressure, you can just watch for a month. This is a crazy show with a lot of moving parts. Take your time. You don't have to, like, do anything, which, of course, for me, you know, in week 2, I'm like, okay, I got to get in here. But they were very patient, and then they were equally sort of open to my input, suggestions. You know, I was trying to kind of change around some, like, internal creative processes, and they were like, great. So it felt, it was not a situation where I felt like I had to, like, prove myself first, or be a yes man, or anything like that. I felt really pretty, you know, including from Jimmy, very valued and included really early on, which is rare, you know. As far as being a woman head writer, I don't really think about that stuff until someone else treats me in a way where I have to think about it. You know, I never think about that stuff until, you know, somebody does something where I'm like, ugh, really? Like, really? You know? Yeah. But and that has certainly happened in my career, even in ways where, like, it's 2 years later, I'll be like, oh, that was because I was a woman. Okay, now I understand what's going on. Yeah. But I try not to let that, you know, influence anything that I do until there's someone making that a problem for me. But, you know, it's pretty, that has not seemed to be an issue at the show.
Amazing.
For me.
Amazing. I love it. I could talk to you both for ages and get all the different segments and talk about all the different skits. Sadly, we've run out of time. But Sarah, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining the SAG-AFTRA Foundation.
Of course. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
And you can donate at the bottom of the screen to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation COVID-19 Fund, and all the information is on the website. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.